Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran has not agreed to all the red lines set out by US President Donald Trump for a diplomatic solution, Vice President JD Vance has said after talks in Geneva. Vance appeared to indicate that the United States was still interested in diplomacy after Trump threatened force if Iran's clerical state does not agree on key concerns, starting with its nuclear program. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators are resuming a second round of peace talks in Geneva today, as US envoy Steve Witkoff said that all talks had brought about meaningful progress in the Washington-led drive to end Europe's biggest war since World War II. A frantic search is underway for 10 backcountry skiers missing in an avalanche in the mountains of California, where a huge storm dumped heavy snow. Officials say a group of 16 people, 4 guides and 12 clients were caught up in the avalanche. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ties between India and France are very special after talks with President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day visit for the AI summit. Armed group Hezbollah rejected the Lebanese government's decision to grant the army at least 4 months to advance the second phase of nationwide disarmament plan, saying it would not accept what it sees as a more serving Israel. Millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity, according to a panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Vatican will not participate in US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace initiative. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's top diplomatic official, said, while adding that efforts to handle crisis situations should be managed by the United Nations. Pope Leo, the first US Pope and critic of some of Trump's policies, was invited to join the board in January. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is building an artificial intelligence accountability program as his office probes Elon Musk's XAI over the generation of non-consensual sexually explicit images. Bonta moved quickly last month to send a cease and desist letter to XAI as regulators globally investigated the company. And for your top story this hour, US Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the world needs to concentrate on its current energy needs as net zero was never going to happen, and that all the current climate policies aren't doing anything to move the needle on climate change. He also stated that climate cult has weakened Europe, driven up energy prices and moved jobs to Asia. He has added that it has reduced economic opportunities for Europeans, made it harder to pay their bills, and has made them very dependent on Russia. We are now being joined by In a significant political move, Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte has announced her candidacy for the 2028 presidential election. Speaking at a news conference, Duterte declared that she is running as the next president of the Philippines. She emphasized her dedication to the country, offering her life and strength and future in service to the nation. Her candidacy has been widely anticipated, with independent surveys positioning her as a strong contender as per the Constitution. Current President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is ineligible for re-election, paving the way for a competitive race in 2028. Duterte, the daughter of former President Rodrigo Duterte, is entering the race amid her father's ongoing legal troubles in The Hague related to his controversial war on drugs.
Mga kababayan, ibalik natin ang tapang at malasakit para sa Diyos, sa bayan, at para sa bawat pamilyang Pilipino. Ako si Sara Duterte. Tatakbo bilang Pangulo ng Pilipinas. Shukran. I offer my life, my strength, and my future in the service of our nation.
We are now being joined by Jim Rice, who's a professor of international law, joining us from the Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. Why has Sara Duterte decided to run for presidency in 2028, and why has she expressed it now? And what does this mean, or what could it mean for Philippines politics?
Okay, thanks for having me on. Those are all great questions. If I could just give your viewers a little bit of background to this. As you mentioned before in your lead-in, Sara Duterte is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte, who is the former president of the Philippines. As your lead-in also mentioned, Rodrigo Duterte is now in The Hague, facing charges of crimes against humanity for his role in Duterte's policy of killing drug users, in which there were thousands and thousands of individuals who were killed during the Duterte administration. As you also mentioned, or as the lead-in maybe not mentioned, was the fact that in the Philippines, each president only gets a 6-year term. So in this case, the president at this time, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., can't run for re-election. So now we have a situation where the former vice president, Sara Duterte, where the current Vice President Sara Duterte is running against we don't know whom. So in 2022, Sara Duterte ran on the same ticket as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And the two of them won by an overwhelming margin. And Sara, it was always felt that Sara had wanted to be the top, on the top ticket running for the president. And in the end, it was Sara who was the vice president. Very quickly after the inauguration, the so-called uni team, which was the term that they used during the campaign for Duterte and Marcos, fell apart, with Sara Duterte being dissatisfied with her role as the Secretary for Education. And at one point, she went on a late night television rant or on YouTube or Facebook, in which she stated that if something happened to her, that she had ordered a hitman to assassinate President Marcos. This led to impeachment proceedings against Duterte, which were derailed because the Supreme Court regarded the case against her was flawed through procedural means. So at this point, Duterte seems to be the front runner for the president, but there are interesting questions and problems that she faces, and I'd be happy to talk about them.
And are there any legal or constitutional challenges that could affect her ability to run?
At present, I don't know of any that are. Although during the past several months there have been several. There's been an ongoing scandal regarding flood control, in which several politicians have been implicated. Although this seems to have implicated politicians from both sides of the political divide. In terms of constitutional barriers to Ms. Vice President Duterte's candidacy, I don't know of any.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim White, but please don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Japan's lower house has formally reappointed Sani Takaichi as Prime Minister 10 days after her historic landslide victory in the snap elections. Takaichi, 64, made history in October when she became Japan's first woman premier. Her party went on to secure a 2/3 majority in the lower house vote held on February the 8th. Strengthening her grip on power, in her initial statements, Takaichi has said she wants to bolster Japan's military capabilities, a move that could further strain relations with China and raise regional tensions. At the same time, the newly reappointed Prime Minister faces pressure at home to revive Japan's sluggish economy, address rising living costs and stabilise public confidence. With a strong parliamentary mandate, Takaichi now begins a new term with broad authority, but also with major challenges on both the domestic and international fronts. We are now being rejoined by Jim Rice. Thank you for joining us back here today on NewsX World. So Takaichi has signalled plans to push more conservative policies. What are the potential impacts of these policies on social issues like immigration, defence and constitutional reform?
Okay, those are all excellent questions. Well, as you know, Japan's constitution, which was written immediately after the Second World War by the United States, has one of its sections prohibits the use of war, and so it's called the Peace Constitution. Although this has been reinterpreted over the past decade, Japan has been building up its military in large part in response to China's own military buildup, which is unprecedented. And in terms of the other question that you mentioned, in terms of immigration, Japan has always taken a very strong position against allowing foreign migrant long-term workers to settle in the Philippines. And in many ways, this has come as the population of the Philippines ages. It's now one of the oldest populations, and this is contributing to the economy slowing down over the past couple of decades. So the third thing, of course, is I think it ties back into the Philippines and the South China Sea, or what we here in the Philippines call the West Philippine Sea, because China poses a real threat not only to Taiwan, which of course we know about, but also to the Philippines, because China has encroached into the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. And during the Biden administration, his presidency built up an alliance between Japan, the Philippines, the United States, and Australia in order to try and deter further encroachment from the PRC. So these are challenges which the current Prime Minister of Japan now faces, and I hope she's able to manage these difficulties.
And what economic challenges and opportunities might Japan face under Takaichi's government, considering rising living costs and fiscal priorities?
Well, Japan is an advanced economy, and it's faced these kind of difficulties before. As many of your viewers know, Japan exports, but actually it tends to locate its factories, its manufacturing centers in the places where they sell their goods. So Japan has really become far more sophisticated in its, its management of supply chains. I would say that the biggest problem that Japan faces long term, though, is its demographic decline. And again, for various reasons, Japan has been reluctant to allow immigration.
And how might Takaichi's reappointment influence Japan's relationship with allies such as the United States and partners in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, again, that's a great question. I think that Takaichi's strong mandate, which has been given over the weekend in the lower house, puts her in a strong position to be able to further build up her relations with, the Trump administration. The problem is, at this point, very few people, certainly I, don't know the position that Trump is going to take regarding the Indo-Pacific. Will the Trump administration be engaged as Biden was during his tenure, or will Trump pull back? But if anyone can manage what is a very mercurial President Trump, it would be Takaichi.
Thank you so much, Jim Rice, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. Garbage has begun to pile up on street corners in the Cuban capital of Havana, attracting hordes of files and reeking of rotten food, in one of the most visible impacts of the US bid to prevent oil from reaching the Caribbean's largest island. Cuban authorities have reported that this month that only 44 of Havana's 106 rubbish trucks were able to keep operating due to fuel shortages, slowing garbage collection. Cardboard boxes, used bags, plastic bottles and rags have piled up on the street corners across the seafront capital, as some residents sorted through the waste looking for scraps as they could be reused, while motorists, pedestrians and bikers are forced to circumvent the imposing heaps. Meanwhile, the UN spokesperson Stephanie Dravarik and some locals have reacted. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
The General's been following the situation in Cuba extremely closely, and I can tell you that he's very concerned about the situation in Cuba, and which is worsening as oil needs continue to be unmet. As you know, the General Assembly has consistently called for an end to the embargo imposed by the United States on Cuba. The Secretary General would like to see all parties pursue dialogue and respect for international law yet again. But our teams on the ground are working with the government to help support the humanitarian relief for the people of Cuba.
Mucho basurero. Y ahora con el problema del petróleo, más todavía. No sé, sugiero que muchachos que no trabajan, ¿viste? O los presos que están, que los saquen a recoger la basura, yo no sé, algo. Porque el basurero no para. Y ahora con este problema del petróleo, mucho menos. ¿Vale? Es mi intención para mí, no sé. Porque la verdad que con eso no salimos de los virus que hay. Vamos a salir nunca.
Aquí en La Habana, donde quiera el hay. No sé cómo será el problema de energético, si es el problema de petróleo, si es el problema de qué, pero es así. Toda la basura esa, a mí me parece que eso deberían recogerlo. Porque aquí hace más de como 10 días que no viene el carro. Y ya te estaba mirando. Por lo menos ahí son 7, 8 camiones.
We are now being joined by Collins Chong-Yu Keats, who's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. Who bears responsibility for Cuba's worsening conditions? External pressure from sanctions or internal economic and infrastructure challenges?
Well, we have seen how this is a mixture of both. We have seen this is also a systemic constraint domestically on the part of the regime in Cuba. We have seen how, of course, also the restriction in terms of access to financing, to shipping, insurance, refined fuel markets, and of course also this has produced further constraints, and on the part of the mobility of goods, as well as also contributing to the factor of the shortages of food. But we have seen how now fuel rationing is now being politically calibrated, and of course the risk of inflation, and of course the ripple effects on the people. But we have seen also how the systemic and structural effects of years and decades of these issues on being existing, and of course also the impact on energy infrastructure and all that. So we have seen how the recent days the impact of these restrictions and access, and there have also been this wariness on the part of traditional allies, including China and Russia, who both have been wary of providing further support system to Cuba, and of course also Russia is itself being restricted in terms of financial capacity, as well as China, who has also been wary of further deepening its presence in Cuba in terms of what has happened in the case of Venezuela. And this is the, of course, a mystery of a multi-pronged and multifactorial capacity as to what has happened now in Cuba. But and we foresee that to continue at least for the days and weeks to come, unless there is this profound changes on the part of how the response system will be. But as of now, we have seen how this volatility and the compounding impact of the U.S. sanctions have really further pushed Cuba into a tighter spot in this regard, Ellie.
And should international organisations such as the United Nations or humanitarian agencies intervene to address food, fuel, waste crisis in Cuba?
We have seen that before, and to no avail, unless there is this structural push domestically, and of course there's been little to no serious efforts being seen, and hence we have seen how the sanctions are still in place, and of course also it needs to have this systemic integration of efforts both domestically and also the injection of support externally. And of course for the time being we have seen how this has been dire in terms of the situation on the ground for the people in Cuba, in terms of the collapse of this the long-term confidence in terms of the governance structure, in terms of the capacity and capability of the regime to provide the necessary control and support, especially in terms of food security, especially in terms of the availability of food supply to the people. Food rationing is a secondary crisis. Of course, we have seen how it's now being calibrated to ensure that the critical sectors are met in terms of the demands for fuel and foods. But the sentiments of the people in terms of ensuring minimum food availability, which will be critical to any regime stability. So energy blackouts are being tolerated more in terms of the acceptance level by the people, but in terms of food availability and empty food shelves, this is resonating, and this will be hugely impactful to the sentiments of the people. So the leadership understands that food scarcity and not the shortages of fuel or energy alone, which will trigger any potential social unrest. And of course, we have seen that before in the case of Sudan. It has been systemic, it has been endemic now, and for the case of Cuba, remains to be seen now for the next this couple of days in this timeline. But of course, the U.S. sanctions also a major test for the leadership in terms of how you respond to this, and also how reliable the traditional allies of Cuba will be in times like this. And we have seen that now. We have not seen that level of support being given for now.
Thank you so much, Colin Strong-Ukey, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. Warner Brothers Discovery has rejected a latest hostile bid from Paramount's Skydance, but has given the rival studio 7 days to submit a best and final offer that could top its existing deal with Netflix. The Paramount offer values Warner Brothers at about $30 a share, with discussions even touching on a possible $31. However, Warner Brothers said its board does not believe the Paramount proposal is likely to be superior to its agreement with Netflix, and said it remains fully committed to that transaction. Under the terms of the deal, Paramount has until February the 23rd to improve its offer, which Netflix would then be allowed to match. The competing bids highlight intense consolidation pressures in the global entertainment industry, with control of Warner Brothers' vast film and television library at stake. A shareholder vote on the Netflix deal is scheduled for March 20th, even as activists, investors and regulators closely watch the outcome. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.